Hasan Minhaj, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. What's happening?
Oh, quarantine life.
Yep.
How's it going for you?
Well, as we record this, pretty good. My daughter just woke up from her nap. She's pretty in a good zone. She had a good poop. We changed the diaper, and we're off to the races. I just handed her off, and I'm here with you. So we're doing good.
Good. Yeah, you guys really, I thought I was leveling up my quarantine game by successfully moving. You guys had a full-on kid.
We have a newborn, yeah. So we have a 2-year-old, we have a newborn. So we have a little Corona baby too. So my son is 4 months old, and he was born through this whole COVID saga.
Yeah. How has that been for you all?
It's been surreal in the sense that I had no idea we're living through history. Just when he was born, it was during that time when we're in the epicenter of this pandemic, right? And so we were going through the PPE shortages and all sorts of stuff that was going down at hospitals. And you're like, why are doctors wearing dishwashing gloves and why are nurses dressed in trash bags? But you're just in the zone of delivery and giving birth in that moment. And luckily, he was healthy, mama's healthy, and so I just feel grateful that we made it through. But I have been journaling a lot, oddly, about everything. So maybe when I look back on this, I'm like, oh, that was very weird. And it's kind of crazy that happened and you lived through that.
Yeah, you mentioned in the last episode of the season, I'm not sure if being in the middle of history is actually very fun.
100%.
Yeah.
Like, that's the weird thing. I talked about it. There was kind of a sign off for our last episode of the cycle, where I just kind of wanted to talk about how I was feeling. And one of the things that everybody has reminded us of, whether you're reading an opinion piece in the New York Times, it's always in huge font, "We are living through history. Can you believe it?" And I'm like, yeah, living through history sucks. Watching history is cool because it has a nice story arc. We have a nice clean ending. Oh, like Abe Lincoln should have never gone to go see a play that day. Like you totally know, maybe President Kennedy should have had a not drop top that day. Like you always know what should have happened. And I know those are very dark jokes, but honestly, like you can see things and the ability to see things in the past, you have such 20/20 perspective. But as you're living through it, you don't know where you are in the story. You don't know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
Yeah.
You're just living through it and you don't have clarity. And so, one of the things that I felt, and I don't know if you felt this way, Audrey, is that I think not only whether it comes to entertainment or the country, we've been looking for leadership and we've been looking for honesty and in every department of our lives. And it's been really hard to find. And I feel that at a visceral level.
I feel that. And I think there is this reaction where people then start willfully ignoring the people who are supposedly in charge because they are just so untrustworthy, right? Yeah. So then we start looking for the other sources of truth and credibility and digging even further, which I think is actually, in a way, a big boon for civil society.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope coming out of this, if there is this reckoning and questioning of institutions, I hope that we collectively as a society have a system in place to replace that with a system that works. Hey, we trust these folks and they're both ethical and honest and consistent with what they're saying, right? And so right now, even from a public health standpoint, we're all over the place, Yeah.
We're just begging for Anthony Fauci to get on the Zoom and just tell us.
Yeah, and tell
three, right?
Like every few weeks changes, we're just like, oh, phase 2, we're reopening. Whoa, wait, it's spiking. So wait, what's going on? Like, I've turned into a conspiracy theorist where I'm just like, whoa, wait, where I'm just like, wait, didn't you just say everything was okay and that we bent the curve, but now it's not? Like, do you know what I mean? And so you start questioning even yourself and the assumptions that you have, where you're like, yeah, that was supposed to be the way it is, and it's black and white, but it's not. We're figuring it all out in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. It does kind of feel like we're living in the Matrix. I personally would like everybody to, I would like to unplug if possible.
What I want, I just want normal again. Do you know
Right. And yeah, and I find myself questioning, I don't know if you do this, as it's funny because I've had other friends who said that they started journaling and trying to kind of catalog what it's like to be in this right now. I
Mm,
stopped for a little bit, but I keep wondering what normal will be,
right.
because even as we open up these retail establishments and we try to have some semblance of normalcy, like getting into a restaurant, it doesn't feel normal. And I don't know how close in proximity we are to it ever feeling back to where, what it
Right.
felt like.
And that's that same thing of like, are we in act one? Like, is there going to be a
Yeah.
twist? And then by the time, or is this act three? Like, that's the end of the movie. This is what going to go get coffee is going to be like for the rest of our life. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
I saw a very funny Twitter, someone posted on Twitter that 2020 has the worst writer's room. Like, you don't start with a pandemic
yeah,
and
yeah,
throw in a race revolution, and
right.
then you have murder hornets that you just don't do anything with by
Right.
episode 3. I
Yeah,
mean, 2020 needs to take a workshop. Let's
totally.
be real.
Let's pare it down. What are our key problems? And then let's just focus just on that. Yeah.
What are the beats, right?
Yeah.
For you though, it's been a really interesting cycle of your show. You have been doing it socially distanced. What has been the hardest needle to thread? Excuse me. What's been the toughest thing for you production wise this cycle?
I mean, no doubt, shutting down production right when we were starting. We had written
Mhm.
a lot of our episodes, a lot of our research books were done, a lot of our graphics and that our amazing animation department, they had designed all these really beautiful animations that were set to be made for our screens. And then March 14th, the week of that, of taping that week, right across the street, there was an outbreak at CBS. Right next door to us at 60 Minutes, there was an outbreak. And at John Jay College, right down the street, there was another outbreak. And so we had to shut things down and figure out, okay, A, are we ever coming back to the studio? B, how do we keep everybody safe during this interim period? And C, if we're not coming back to the studio, what does Patriot Act look like? And so much of my show is I'm just a man with screens. So if I don't have my screens, like, what am I going to
But
do?
you have an audience that can react to you and you
Totally.
can like vibe off of
Yeah,
them. And like, I'll be watching and I'll laugh to myself, but I'm like, oh, this is not a communal thing anymore. It's just me on my
right,
couch. So
right.
what was that like for you? I think I saw a professor line up a bunch of like stuffed animals so he could be reacting to something. Did you have like an equivalent for that?
Well, we moved in our showrunner, so he lived with us while we're doing all of the.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
we were taping. So Prashant, who's our showrunner and
Yeah.
co-creator, so he moved in with me and my family. So again, very weird to be living with your coworker. Again, he's a friend, I love him, but we've been living together now for months. I did not
Oh,
know.
he's still living with you.
Well, he moved out. He moved out
Okay.
once we wrapped the episode for this week. But yeah, he
Okay.
was with us for a very long time, and it's just weird going from a writers' meeting to then taping, and then also going to dinner. But like family dinner, we're not going out for dinner. We're just
Right,
having
right,
dinner.
right.
And
Right.
so yeah, that was the toughest. And then again, because we were doing everything socially distanced in our house, we had to, set up the green screen, do lighting, be grip, be PAs, running and getting caught. Like, we're just doing everything. And so it took me back to the beginning of when, I just started in my career and I was an open micer doing YouTube videos. But we couldn't have done it without everybody on the staff also stepping up in terms of remote working. Our writers
Mhm.
were still delivering amazing scripts with incredible turnaround, considering how fast the news was changing. And our
Yeah.
graphics department was able to just create this immersive, visual world that I live in, and it's still translated. That's the thing that amazed me the most, is the fact that, in these circumstances, we leaned into the urgency, not only tonally with the scripts, but also just the style of the show. Like, I go right to camera one and we just go. And I didn't know if it was going to work, but I remember when we did a test episode, I was like, no, this can play.
The last episode too, because at the end you do the whole there's a bit of a skit. Did you guys How were you able to shoot that? Because it didn't look like you were quite socially distanced.
Yeah, so we shot that sketch before COVID,
Okay.
before the whole outbreak. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really just like you guys were really close to each other.
I was like, that lady looks elderly. Is this safe? Is this safe for her? I'm not sure.
Vector, this is not good. Yeah. Yeah, we shot that in February, but
Okay.
but yeah, we had written, so our last episode of the cycle this week is on taxes. But
yeah.
Again, we had written the episode, we really focused on TurboTax and kind of the tactics they use to get people to pay for their tax services. But we had to update it because obviously there's been the tax deadline has been shifted. And so that was another example of, hey, you have an idea of what you want to say. Ironically enough, COVID just made the episode even more urgent.
I know, it seems like the news absolutely hasn't stopped. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, especially lately, is this reckoning moment that media seems to be having. The last time we talked, was for our hashtag represent table, which inherently was about representation and diversity, even though we didn't like explicitly talk about that. But, we're hearing Hollywood pivot in a big way. We're seeing media pivot in a big way. And even including your former boss, Jon Stewart. He recently said that he hadn't done enough to diversify his writer's room on Daily Show. I'm curious, what was your experience and how do you react to hearing him say that?
It was really powerful to hear Jon talk about his blind spots. And I will say this, like when you talk about being a good faith actor, Jay Stu is one of the best in the business in terms of just his empathy, his kindness, and his willingness to learn. But I, seeing him have this much space and distance from when he was on the show to understand, oh wow, he was in that day-to-day grind of trying to make the Daily Show as great as it can be. And sometimes he didn't have the time or the bandwidth to consider all the different angles. And I think one of the best things that he did was not only acknowledge that, hey, I have these blind spots, but what was really cool is him acknowledging how effortless it is when you give somebody else a platform. You don't have to bend over backwards to try. And I think that's the critical part of the discussion. I think so many times, and Audrey, you definitely understand this, as a person of color, we get tokenized and put into these sort of Scottie Pippen, you're a sidekick situation. And instead of being an Act One correspondent where you have 3.5 minutes, the best thing you can do is give Larry Wilmore his own show, or let Trevor Noah helm the desk and talk about police brutality and talk about race relations vis-a-vis his perspective. And I hope that's the learning moment that we have in Hollywood. Nobody will do it as accurately as if you give that person that shot in the runway room to say what they really feel and talk about what they really talk about. We did this piece about George Floyd and it was 12 minutes. And I thought to myself, I said, man, if I was a correspondent or if I was on SNL, if I was on a ensemble variety show, I would never have the runway room to talk about the Asian American complicity in Black-white race relations in America. We just wouldn't have the time to get into it. But the fact that I have my own show allows me to have the runway room to say that. And so the thing that I hope going forward is we see more Patriot Acts, we see more Insecures, we see more Ramis, but they're for different types of voices. Don't just give us the 6th slot on the billing. You give that person their own show and really watch them fly. Then it's up to us to make the show really specific, unique, and just undeniably great, which we've seen, and that's really awesome.
The other thing that I think it's brought up, at least for me as a journalist and as a reporter, is who am I doing this for? Who's my audience? And for you, I wonder who has been your, because that changes too, right? Yeah. And so many times we have the figurative white guy on your shoulder, and sometimes it's not figurative. He is like the actual person.
Yeah.
Writing you emails and stuff.
Right.
So,
right.
But for you and Prashant, like, who is your audience?
So I told him this early on, and this actually happened when we first started pitching. when we were pitching the show around, and we went to all the different platforms, all the streaming giants. And the reason why Netflix to us was a no-brainer was the fact that it's in 190 countries. And it allowed me to break out of the cognitive framework of being in the late night world with multiple Jimmys, because I was not speaking to the North American audience anymore. I'm speaking to the world. And when I'm doing a piece about the elections in the Philippines, or censorship in China, or Indian elections, or Saudi Arabia, there are more people outside of the continental United States that know about that stuff than people here in the States know about those issues. And so for the first time, I actually felt like I was playing a home game. I'm like, no, there's more people who kind of look like me than look like any of the people that currently host late night shows. Oh, this is going to work out beautifully. And the fact that it's on Netflix and on YouTube, game over. Like, we're going to be in every WhatsApp channel across the world.
Like, you're going to be on all the auntie group chats.
Every auntie, uncle, all of your family around the world are going to be passing around our videos, you know? And
all the Lola group chats.
100%. All those like little sub Facebook groups, subtle curry traits, subtle Asian traits, like I'm ready to go. And so I think that's what caught people by surprise. There was this like, whoa, like, how are these videos getting like 4 million views, 5 million? Where's this coming from? And I think what was really cool to see was to see that people responded to it. And eventually folks, even here in the States, kind of caught up. And what I love most about the show and working with the different people at our show is that we're expanding the American palette for what the news can be and should be.
Absolutely. I recently revisited Homecoming King, which is one of my favorite. I would even call it like a stand-up special. I think it's like a, I don't know, it's like a one-man show performance. Like it kind of transcends just, I think, your normal stand-up special. But there was this one that your story with, is her name Bethany on the show, was really, really hit a nerve with me, because, and I think it would hit a nerve with a lot of kids of immigrants, first generation, second generation.
Right.
When you discover that the person you love either is racist or has racist family members or will reject you in such a way, like, it called up so many emotions for me from my college experience, my college boyfriend.
Right.
And in some ways, I don't, I think a lot of us, it's a trauma in so many ways.
Totally.
How did you finally move past that, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I wrote that show and developed it off Broadway 10 years after graduating high school, right? So I had gone through college and adulthood and then gotten married, right? And so it was one of those things where I kind of, to me, really the show is a love letter to America. And I'm really speaking for, I think, a lot of kids, children of immigrants that went through what we went through, where our parents came here and then we became the vanguards of what the American experience was going to be for our family. And I had distance from it, and I was able to see that powerful doorstep moment for what it was. And I didn't realize at the time when it happened, you kind of don't really know what it means. But as I started workshopping it and taking it to other places, so many people came up to me and were like, I experienced something very similar when I was in high school or middle school or college or even now. And I had no idea it was such a unifying thing, because in the moment when you experience it, it's kind of embarrassing. You don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's traumatic, and I think kind of skews your sense of self.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would encourage folks to feel, and I've tried to remind myself of this too, is that, we do have value irrespective of whether or not, quote unquote, Bethany's family wants to give you that or not. Do you know what I mean? It's the theme that I talk about in the show of having the audacity of equality.
Yeah, absolutely. Which we are wrestling with as a society right now.
Really?
In the last episode, you mentioned how you don't know how this is all going to be written in the history books, which in and of itself, I think could be an episode, right?
Totally.
Like,
Totally.
I hope they get your name right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not Hasan Nanjiani.
Hasan Minhaj, right?
Yeah.
I still have look. If they mess it up, I'll have a great body in the photo.
This
Hopefully they give me like current Kumail's body. You know what I mean? Like they give me the abs. That'll be worth it.
Do you think Kumail is enjoying his time being that ripped?
I think he loves it. I mean, look, I think he loves the imagery of it, but I cannot imagine he loves not having carbs.
Yeah, I think he eats like vegetables for fun or something. I
asked him that day we did our thing of just like, hey, was the moment that you opened up your Instagram and found out that you were a thirst trap, is that moment better than never having Talenti ice cream ever again? Like that's
a good question.
Like was that dopamine hit worth never having toast with breakfast?
I mean, for me, it would be straight. I mean, I don't know. I'm not there. So like, I haven't depleted all of my body of carbs, and like,
right.
you get brain fog from that stuff. Have you heard, like, I've tried, it's terrible.
I'm amazed that he sat through that entire interview. I'm just like, and he was cognizant, he was cogent. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's impressive. But it's like when you look that good, it's like whatever you do will be impressive. What do you really hope that history books get right about this moment, though? And again, like, we're not out of it really enough, but there is so much going on, and I think there is so much working through that people are already doing. Like you talked about not being able to point out who the good guys and the bad guys were, but I think there's like an active trying to figure that out right now.
So I think there's this clear discomfort happening right now. And any type of social or cultural discomfort just feels bad. It just doesn't sit right. And
well, it disrupts the status quo, which is like, even when it's not serving you, can be very jarring. I think.
And one of the things that I hope happens is I hope we get seminal legislation that comes out of this, because legislation scales and it's permanent. Meaning, even coming out of the fog of war, when a piece of legislation is signed, it causes generational impacts. And so I feel like the moment we're living in right now is no different than those critical moments in 1964 and 1965 when civil rights legislation was passed. And my family was able to come over here because of the Act of 1965. So to think of that a piece of paper that was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson and Martin Luther King Jr. in 65 allowed my father to come here in 82, 17 years later, right? It's a pretty amazing thing to think about. And so I hope as a community and as a country coming out of this, we can force Congress, our politicians, and the institutions that be to give us actual tangible things that last and that scale, right? Because we're adjudicating a lot of cultural war stuff, which I think is important, but legislation, that black and white ink that's signed on an executive order or on a piece of legislation, that's what's going to last way longer than being hot on Twitter for the day.
And for the entertainment industry, for Hollywood, even though it's such a microcosm, but you know what Hollywood puts out deems who is important and who gets those opportunities. Do you see this moment as having an enduring impact? Because for me, I'll be very honest, it feels very reactive. Like, Lady Antebellum was Lady Antebellum for over a decade, and you guys just figured out that, oh wait, that's not a great name, or you know, a white actor being cast for a mixed race animated role. Like, you guys just, like, these were all things that people have been talking about, but now literally this week, this is when we decide that these are wrong.
Yeah. So the Overton window of what is socially acceptable is changing in real time. And I just think, look, Audrey, I don't know where the pendulum is going to swing, but if you're a creative of color, now is the time. If you have a definitive voice or a project or a thing that you want to put forward, I would say just be like unapologetic and go for it. You know, someone who I look up to who always hypes me up is Lena Waithe.
Mm.
Lena is like, Lena's a boss. And like, Lena believes in herself and believes in what she's doing unequivocally, irrespective of whether studios get it or whether Hollywood understands it. And if there ever was a moment to capitalize, I think that moment is now. And even if people think that movies and award shows are meaningless, I will say this: when a movie wins an Oscar or it wins a TV show wins an Emmy, what that does is it allows those creatives to go back and pull equity on that win. In other words, if you have a successful show, you're able to pull equity from that win, go into other rooms, and then continue to sell projects. So John Cho having Crazy Rich Asians be successful allows him to make 3 or 4 other movies. And I think it's our job, is if we do get a win, to continue to make other things that open more doors, and to continue to pull equity from those things.
I think that's a great message. Hasan, it's always really nice to talk to you. I wish we could do this in person.
I know.